get started.
Thank you, Josh. Thank the American Security Project for putting on this event with us. Can everybody hear me? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. This is a dialogue that started a number of years ago. We at the Tower Center at SMU, John D. Tower Center for Political Studies, where I'm the director of the program on national security and defense, assembled a group of people that we thought had the experience to tackle this very difficult subject about the lessons and legacies that we're developing from Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. involvement in both of those. We've continued that dialogue, and the book is just a one-way station along this effort to understand what the implications are for the United States in the future. Today's session is not necessarily about the book, it's about the subject matter. And I've asked each of our authors, one of which, by the way, can't be with us today, and that's Rob Littbach, but each of our authors, 4 chapters in the book, to talk with us this morning about the implications of the U.S. experience in Iraq and Afghanistan for basic U.S. foreign policy and grand strategy, to talk about the meaning for U.S. capacities for COIN, regime change operations, state-building operations, and also to draw out the implications for roles and missions and budgets of the various U.S. national security agencies that the legacy and the lessons bring forward. I don't know what my colleagues are going to say because we're asking them to take a fresh look at these issues. In the book, they did an analysis in depth of some special aspects of it, but they were all told before coming today that they could deal with any of these subject matters in 5 minutes for openers that we're all going to be discussing. I will introduce them in turn, but first, although I'm one of the editors, along with Bob Scales being one of the editors, I am dropping my stance of neutrality as an editor and will give you my take on what the legacies and lessons are briefly for openers. I think it's been well captured, that is the significance and the implications have been well captured by Robert Gates in his valedictory at West Point when he said that any future defense secretary who advises the president to again send a big American land army into Asia or the Middle East should have his head examined, as General MacArthur so delicately put it. Which is a conclusion derived in large measure from our experience with the second question about U.S. capabilities for regime change operations, that type of COIN, nation-state building, which does require a big land army. We can do counterterrorism with drones and special ops, but COIN requires a heavy footprint, a boots-on-the-ground footprint. So what are the lessons of the 2 COIN regime change type operations, state-building operations? First, we're not very good at such operations, even when welcomed as liberators. Second, successful COIN does require successful state building. In other words, a requisite of security is viable governance. Note I didn't say legitimate governance. And a requisite of governance is human security. So there are problems. Forms of government that are viable, sustainable, need to be largely compatible with traditional indigenous cultural norms and structures, which are, in places we might be tempted to intervene, most often hierarchical, ascriptive, and corrupt. Our friends, local allies, may be no better in providing such viable governance than our enemies. And neither our friends or enemies are likely to be true believers in the human rights center type of governance that we as liberators are trying to get them to adopt. As these lessons sink in, what are the national security policy and military planning implications, particularly in this era of constrained military budget. The burden of proof, the burden of justification for those recommending engaging in COIN state-building missions will be much, much heavier than it has been in the past. In short, COIN state-building missions will be marginal, not central, to our basic national security policy and grand strategy, not the core of it, as was widely assumed during the first decade of the 21st century. And we already see this effect in the new national strategy national strategy announcements and guidance, which despite their rhetorical endorsement of a full spectrum of capabilities, or a broad portfolio of capabilities, they exhibit a strong inclination to base U.S. military planning primarily on the premises of the command of the commons and offshore balancing schools. This is, it appears to me, where we are headed. Okay. None of the missions of the forces that Panetta listed in his January guidance document, in none of those is a central place given to counterinsurgency. And counterinsurgency and stability operations come 9th in the list of 10th. Okay. And then, in italics, the Secretary of Defense says, however, U.S. forces will no longer be sized to conduct large-scale, prolonged stability operations. I suggest to you that this is the legacy that we have to live with. And I put it to my colleagues to give their own interpretation of where we now are in defense planning, in national security policy, as a result of our involvement in these two operations.